presentation is how strong is your brand at the shelf? It's a question that I'm sure many of the attendees would like to know. Our presenter is Rajeev Sharma, founder and CEO of VideoMining. So without further ado, here is Rajeev Sharma.
Thank you, John. Hi, everyone. I'm here to present today an exciting new development where we can understand where and how brand purchase decisions are made. And we'll be introducing a couple of new metrics that will allow us to track the brand strength. This is enabled by a new technology that allows us to track in-store behavior. And we'll show how this new metrics leads to at-shelf decision analytics that can help marketers to channelize their efforts to influence the shopping behavior at the shelf. So why is that important today? We are living in a world where consumers are becoming increasingly very savvy, and there's plenty and lots of choices. As a result, the competitive landscape in most of the CPG categories is rapidly changing. In fact, if you look at the last 2 years, almost 90% of all the big brands lost their brand share. This is causing a lot of heartache in many of the major CPG companies. At the same time, a majority of the decisions, almost 76% of the decisions, brand decisions or purchase decisions are actually made in-store. So clearly, the battleground is moving in-store. So if you are a brand marketer, you are looking at the following questions, basically. How can you tailor your marketing strategies to meet your brand goals? Whether it's a defensive strategy or offense strategy to grow the brand, how can you channelize that marketing dollars? And more importantly, what kind of marketing and merchandising vehicles you can use, especially now because there's an explosion of the different types of media that you can use to reach consumers. But most important fact is how can you actually reduce the marketing spending by really investing in places which can have the most impact with your targeted consumers. And with that, you would probably need the data and insights to help you with that decision. So the problem is there's plenty of data out there. The problem is most of the data actually is generated from places where the decisions are quite far removed. Most of the decisions are actually made in-store and at the shelf, whereas most of the traditional data sources, if you can look at it, basically the two major sources of data that marketers use today are made from checkout data and loyalty card data. It really tells you what happened in the past. It doesn't really tell you the details of how the decisions were made. And the big other source of data is all the consumer research that is done through household panels or online panels. The problem again is those insights are gathered from places which are far removed from the place where the decision is made. So the analogy is like a drunk man who drops his key in the dark and then walks over to the next lab to search for the key. So there is plenty of data, but it's not necessary that data will give the right answer because it's far removed from the place that decisions are made. So it's very important to bridge that gap. So one way to bridge that gap is, let me see the video, waiting for the load. Okay. So the best place to look for how the decisions are really made is at the place where the decision is made. So if you have the visibility into how shoppers are actually behaving at the shelf, you begin to understand, for example, this person really is very particular about how she looks at the different products and reads the labels, even though in the real world situation she has to constantly dodge the different carts. So clearly, by looking at the behavior, you can tell the kind of decisions, the kind of process she is using for making those decisions. And having visibility into this kind of behavior can allow you not only to understand the decisions, but also to generate all kinds of metrics that is very useful for marketing and merchandising.
Okay, we have the first poll of the day here. What is the average shopper to buyer conversion salty snacks category in the grocery stores? please select 25, 45, 75, or 90 and hit submit. Okay, some answers are coming in right now. They're still coming in. When they stop, Rajeev, you can interpret.
Okay, so we have several results, and the majority of the people said B. The right answer is C, 75%. So, and just to reiterate what that means, 75% of the people who actually shopped the salty snacks category in grocery converted to a buyer. So the winner is C, 75%, which is pretty good, especially because some categories perform much worse than 75%. Some of them is as low as 20%. That means 80% of people actually shop and then leave. In the salty snack case, it's only 25% who leave without buying. So it's insights like that you can gather from looking at the shopping behavior. So for the purpose of this talk, we want to focus in on a very key question about the decision process. The key question is, the shopper, did she make up her mind before she came to the shelf? And if she made up the mind, was it in your favor, in your brand's favor, or did the decision go to the competition? Or did she go to the shelf and then make the choice? So it's kind of like, is the vote was already decided in your favor, or did she come to the shelf and you had a chance to make a speech or stump speech in this election year to get her to influence the decision? That's a big question. And that's the question we are going to focus on. Where was the decision made? Because once you understand that, that will help you in actually tailoring your marketing strategy. So we don't expect this to be a simple answer. Basically, there are many factors that could determine where you made the decisions. Those factors could be pre-store, depending on who you are. Why were you shopping? What purpose? What was the mission? Why did you go to the store? And where did you go to the store? And were you located? All those factors determine when and where you made the decisions. And once you're inside the store, a host of factors might influence the decision. So it's a very complex answer, but clearly trying to understand that answer will be critical to really finding ways to influence that decision. So let's dig deeper into the decision process or the shopping process. So for the purpose of this talk, we can think of the shopping process as consisting of three main activities. The first one is you simply want to locate the product, the navigation, where you want to just find out where the product is. Doesn't matter whether you have decided to buy a particular product or not. You're kind of scouting around to find the particular product that you're looking for. The second process is the deliberation. This is where you start looking at features or brand or price to help you in making a decision. This is where it could be very complex, where if, like the video you saw, the person could be reading ingredients and seeing whether it's meeting her need, and or looking at pricing to compare and find out the best product to meet your need. So deliberation is a very important process. Then the last is the selection, the physical act of actually picking up the product and putting it in a basket. So if you simplify the shopping process into three different stages, they don't have to be sequential. You can have navigation, deliberation, you can go back to navigation. But if you look at the total activity, you can put that into one of these three buckets. Why is that important? It's important because by just looking at your behavior and determining your behavior, classifying into one of these three phases, whether you're navigating, deliberating, or selecting, you can actually begin to tell whether the decision was made before you encountered the shelf or at the shelf. So, for example, at the shelf, you will normally have these three processes: navigation, deliberation, and selection. Whereas if your decision was made before you came to the shelf, you will typically not deliberate. You just navigate, find the product, and select. So the ability to distinguish by looking at the behavior, whether you actually were deliberating or not, is a super critical part of the thesis that we have. Basically, to distinguish whether a brand decision, a purchase decision was made at the shelf, or was it made before the person arrived, the shopper arrived at the shelf? And our key hypothesis or key methodology is to distinguish whether the decision was made at the shelf or pre-shelf. To motivate that, let's look at a couple of videos. So in this example, this person actually leaves his cart at the beginning of the aisle and comes in, and it deliberates a little bit. Not quite as complex as the first video, but he definitely looks at different options, looks back, reconsiders at different options, then kind of lazily comes back and picks the first product that he had looked at. So clearly, there was a little bit of deliberation that happened. So we would classify this as a pre-shelf decision. A decision was made, at-shelf decision, because the decision of actually making the purchase was made at the shelf. In the next example, the person comes in with a cart and he's navigating the category, comes in, looks, and pretty much has pre-decided what to buy, picks up the product and puts it in the cart. So this is an example of pre-shelf decision where clearly the person only spent time in navigating and selecting the product. So the critical part is by looking at the behavior, we will be able to actually distinguish whether there was a deliberation or no deliberation. If there was no deliberation, clearly the decision was made pre-shelf, and if there was a deliberation, it was at-shelf decision. So the ability to classify a decision in one of those two buckets is the critical aspect of what we are proposing. And the way it's possible to do that is through technology. We are able to generate enormous amounts of data on in-store behavior, not looking at just one shopper, but millions of shoppers, and looking at many different variables about their behavior. One of them is time. How much time they're allocating to navigating versus the active process of shopping. We also factor in the size of the category, because that determines how long you spend in navigating, or the complexity of the shopping in terms of the number of SKUs and other navigational aids that you might have in the category, and other aspects of the behavior. So it's a very complex set of variables that we use, and use a proprietary statistical modeling technique to actually map that to determine whether the decision was made at the shelf or pre-shelf. Because once you do that, you're able to then come up with many other formulations that we'll be talking about. Just to give you a little bit more flavor on how we do that, we have a measurement platform that, like the videos we saw, is able to capture the actual process of shopping of shoppers at the shelf. And instead of us watching the video, we have software that converts that into data about very specific aspects of the behavior in terms of where they're interacting, how long they're spending in different aspects of the behavior. And not just at the shelf, but throughout the store. And the same measurement platform is also able to classify each of the shopper into a demographic group, gender, age, range, ethnicity, and is also able to determine the type of trip, or is able to segment the trip type. And just to kind of summarize the different data sources that is used for this by measurement platform, you're able to capture the demographic segmentation of shoppers as they enter the store, able to get their entire path throughout the store, then get the details of the shelf behavior. For example, the example that we gave about determining whether the decision was pre-shelf or at shelf, and then link it to the actual purchase at the checkout so that we have access to the exact brand that they bought and any other information that you get from basket data. So using these four fundamental sources of measurement, we're able to piece it together using very large sample sizes to come up with a framework of decision-making process for the brand, category, and other aspects of the store. So with this, we move to the second quiz.
Okay, the second quiz is, what percentage of salty snacks buying in grocery stores are made pre-shelf? 15, 30, 60, or 90? Make your selection and please hit submit. got a diversity of answers here.
Yep. And you know, salty snack was very popular in converting. So clearly, it's a very most people have salty snacks. A big percentage of baskets have salty snacks. Okay, so let's see what the results are. So a majority of the people said 60%. The leading answer was 60%, the second answer was 30%, and 15% was third, and 90% was fourth. Well, the right answer is A, 15%. So even though the category did very well in terms of converting, a majority of the actual decision was made at the shelf. And it should not be very surprising because you know, the category is very complex with lots of choices and lots of promotion at a given time. Even though you are motivated to buy that because conversion rate is high, you're actually using at-shelf behavior. You're using the information at the shelf for making a final decision. So in a category like salty snack, only 15% of the people came in with predetermined decision. 85% of people actually spent time considering alternatives, whether it's pricing, whether it's brand, whether it's flavor, whether it's any other aspects of the product, and then made a decision. So it's really remarkable how many people actually, how big a role the shelf behavior played in this particular category. So using data like that provides you a new tool now to understand the shopping behavior or this decision behavior. A fundamental aspect of the analytics that we're proposing is being able to take all the buyers of a category and putting them into 4 buckets. So if you look at this quad, the left side of the quad is, the green side is all the buyers who made decisions pre-shelf. That means they came into the category with the mind already made up, whether it was for brand A or whether it's for all the competing brands. The right side of this quad, or the orange side, is all those who actually decided to buy, to actually spend time at the shelf to consider different aspects of the brands and categories of pricing to make a decision. So basically it's pre-shelf versus at-shelf decision, and then for any particular brand you can then find out how much of that population of green versus orange they won. So for example, in this particular example, if you look at all the shoppers, which add up to 100%, 10% of the 100 actually decided in the favor of brand A even before they came to the category. Whereas 55% of the people who actually made up their mind at the shelf of that brand A got 20%. So, and for all other competing brands together, 35% or 35 of them decided pre-shelf and 35 of them decided at shelf. So basically by taking all the brand buyers and putting them in the 4 buckets, you are able to see the competitive landscape in terms of how you're winning. It's the left side is sort of the people who are in the base. Brand A had a base of 10 who were predetermined to buy it. But whereas the brand A had to compete with the brand at the shelf to get 20 more shoppers. The total share that the brand A had was 30 out of the 100 shoppers of the buyers. So that gives a very strong basis to derive metrics that are meaningful. And now let's look at some of the metrics that can be derived from this basic framework. So the first metric that comes out of this framework is how stable was the brand, or what we call is the brand stability quotient. Basically, this is the ratio of the pre-shelf decisions that brand A got versus the total brand A decisions. That means it basically gives an indication of how stable was the purchase, because the greater number of people who came in predetermined to buy brand A, the better it is, the more stable the brand is. Whereas if you have more and more people who are in the orange side of the bucket, you are at risk of losing your share. So it gives an indication of how stable the brand buying is. So from the 30%, from just looking at the sales data, you'll get the brand share, which is 30%, but by breaking into the pre-shelf and at-shelf, you can determine how predictable the purchase of the brand is. And I'll give you more examples of the brand stability and how it applies. The second metric, which is important from marketing point of view, is what percentage of the undecided voters, the right side is sort of the undecided voters, brand A is able to win. And we call this metric at-shelf win rate. So all the people who actually came in at the shelf and used whatever criteria they had to decide on a product purchase, what percentage did you succeed in buying? What was the at-shelf win rate? Because obviously that's what you want to win, more and more of the undecided voters. So you want to increase that number. And there are different tactics you can use for at-shelf and pre-shelf. So the two fundamental metrics that are derived from the buyer mix is brand stability and at-shelf win rate. And how is that going to be used? Basically, once you're able to break the buyer decision process into these 4 buckets and derive these 2 metrics, you can focus on increasing the brand stability. And the kinds of things you'll do to increase brand stability would be some of the traditional marketing. So your brand is so strong that when you come in, you're not even choosing anything else. Or you may give some incentives to shoppers so that when they come in, they're just going to come and look at your product and nothing else. So there's a host of techniques you can apply so that you basically win over a shopper before they come to the shelf. Likewise, if you're trying to increase the at-shelf brand rate or win rate, you'll apply different techniques at the shelf. The primary one could be price. A primary one could be position at the shelf or some kind of messaging, merchandising, a host of other techniques you can use to win the battle at the shelf. But they're fundamentally different tactics that you might be using for increasing your share of pre-shelf buyers and increasing your share at shelf. That's the basis for using these metrics in developing a strategy for marketing. And let me give you a little bit more insight into how you then use this decision mix to develop a strategy. For example, no surprise that whatever number you have who are your loyal shoppers or who are determined to buy your brand, you want to make sure that you retain them. So you'll have some kind of defensive strategy so you keep your sort of base happy. Likewise, you know it's very difficult to get the people who are loyal. Sorry, let me go back a little bit. Likewise, the people who are loyal or people who come in with a pre-shelf decision for your competition, it's very hard to interrupt them. So you'll have to use some techniques to disrupt their behavior. This is like trying to go after the base of your opponent. So you'll have to use disruptive techniques like trials and samples to actually make them change their mind. On the orange side, though, you will have a better chance of trying to win at the shelf by converting more and more of the at-shelf decision makers by the tactics that we talked about earlier, for example, temporary price reductions or different kinds of merchandising techniques or at-shelf techniques, so that because they are actually actively shopping, you can win more of the people who had gone to your competition. And then of the people, the last group, the 4th quadrant, the people who are buying your brand but they are making the decision at shelf, you try to shift them more towards the left because you want to convert more and more of them into pre-shelf buyers so that you can increase your brand stability, so you can be more predictable. You don't want to rely too much of decisions that are made at the shelf, if it's possible to do that. So basically, the key idea is that by taking all the buyers of a particular category, looking at your share of the buyers, and then breaking them into pre-shelf and at-shelf buyers, you're able to develop strategies for each of these groups separately. And because the kind of thing that you want to do for influence them is quite different. You want to retain your current pre-shelf buyers. You want to convert more of your at-shelf buyers to become pre-shelf. then in terms of dealing with the competition, you have a slightly different strategy to disrupt the pre-shelf buyers of competition. And all the people who are on the right bottom quadrants, you want to apply techniques to move them over to your side and eventually to become a loyal buyer. So that gives you a basis for sort of dividing and conquering all the brand buyers into different groups and applying the right kind of strategies for each of them. To enable that, we just mentioned briefly, but one of the big things you can do is look at not just the aggregate buyer decision mix, but you can start looking at the different segments in each of these 4 buckets. Particularly, for example, you can just look at the demographic segments and see of each of this population where you are over-indexing or under-indexing, so that you can understand where the opportunity is. For example, if you are over-indexing for a particular segment with at shelf, you can target them to move to the left. Likewise, you can look at the competition, you look at the 2 buckets, the 2 quadrants for the competition, you can see who they are, then you can apply techniques to reach them better, whether it's by demographic segments, or whether it's trip segments, or whether any other kind of segmentation that you can arrive by looking at the demographics and the basket data.
We've had a couple questions come in, Rajeev. One of them, if so few purchasing decisions are made prior to encountering the product at shelf, what is the benefit of heavy pre-shop marketing and advertising spending?
A very good question. It is not necessary. We gave one example where there was a heavy at-shelf decision making. It's not necessarily true for every category. That's number one. Number two is there's still a lot of advantage in pre-shelf marketing, because although some majority of the decisions may be made at shelf, you may still influence that decision by pre-shelf marketing. So it is not necessary that you succeed in people coming in with 100% decision in your favor, but they might be leaning towards it. So there is a place for both marketing. We are not concluding that one or the other is better.
Okay, we've had a request to re-show the slide to show techniques to increase purchase at shelf. I don't know if you want to do that now or later on, but that was the request.
Okay, I can go back and look at the technique for determining the pre-shelf and at shelf.
Okay.
As we conclude. Hopefully we'll have time to do that.
Sure. Okay. That's all for now.
So basically where we were is we had begun with classifying the overall shopping behavior into these 4 buckets, derived key metrics, and now we are by looking at the population by segments, we are able to actually determine how to get to some of the strategies. How are you going to create strategies to move people around in these 4 quadrants? And the way you can do it is by identifying who they are. So so that you can actually start targeting specific segments in each of those buckets. The second aspect about the framework is that the decision actually keeps changing, and that might relate also to the previous question. So we are not talking about necessarily like the brand recognition and other metrics. We are talking about pre-shelf versus at-shelf decision. By tracking, so in this chart, basically you see a track of the decision mix. The orange being the at-shelf decision, green being the pre-shelf. So by tracking this mix for any given brand or a category over time, you can see how you're able to actually influence, whether it's by pre-category marketing or post-category or at-shelf marketing techniques. And a host of factors can influence the mix. For example, you could be spending a lot in one of the marketing techniques, whether it's pre-shelf or at-shelf, but your competition is not static. So, but the competition could be actively doing something that could actually convert some of your at-shelf buyers to them, or your at-shelf pre-shelf buyers into at-shelf. Similarly, there could be external factors. For example, there could be some factors that make people hesitate, actually reconsider the decision-making process. And those things you cannot track by just looking at the total sales. So you have to look at decision process constantly because it actually does keep changing. I'll give some examples of how that could be used. So the two key aspects is segmentation and tracking over time. With that, basically that motivates us to look at what factors would you like to track over time given the framework. What are the key metrics that will help you in understanding where to spend your marketing dollars? The first one is, of course, what you do traditionally, which is total share of category decisions. This is what percentage the of the category share a particular brand gets. That's the basic scorecard that you will have. And then you'll track the total at-shelf win rate, so to see how you're doing at a given time with at-shelf decisions. Number 3 is what we already talked about, is the brand stability quotient, because that gives you the mix of basically how stable is your brand, and gives you an indication of how you are stable. Before people start moving over to your competition, you'll actually be able to see decrease in brand stability, for example. Or if you're doing the right things, your brand stability could be increasing over time. It's very important to look at the brand stability quotient in the context of the category stability. For example, in the salty snack case, if the category stability is very, very small, that means it's only 15%, then clearly you cannot expect your brand to go above that. But luckily, many other categories have much better brand decision stability. But the important number is the last one, where you actually index the brand stability quotient with the category stability quotient to understand how you're doing with respect to the category. So again, going back to the extreme example of salty snacks, if the category stability index is only 15, you judge it with respect to that. Are you over-indexing with respect to that or under-indexing? So if you're 16, you're already above 100. If you're 10, then you're far below the category stability index. So basically, with these 5 measures, you'll be able to address different aspects of what you would like to know about the decision process about your brand and category over time. With that, in the interest of time, I would like to give you some examples, and then perhaps I can go back to the question that one of the viewers had about how to calculate that. So the first case study is of a brand that's a pretty good share of the category. It's at 35% share of the category. Its at-shelf win rate is also very good. It's 45%. However, its brand stability quotient is 29, and which is low compared to the category stability quotient, which gives it a brand stability quotient of, let me get this pointer, of 64. That means you are heavily under-indexing. So you are basically, you're pretty unstable. That means you are too much reliant on at-shelf decision. And therefore, your performance would be far less predictable than brands that have a higher stability quotient. So in this particular case, you would dig deeper into where you are under-indexing. For example, you could be under-indexing in millennials, and you may like to focus on that particular segment where you're under-indexing the most. So in this particular case, you would apply a program which is meant to increase the repeat purchasing and slowly increase the brand stability so that there more and more decisions are made pre-shelf. And you could target in on a segment like a millennial group and focus on giving them incentives so that when they walk into the category, they are already decided in your favor. So that's the example of increasing pre-shelf or need for increasing the pre-shelf brand marketing. So in the second case study is the opposite. Brand B has 30% market share in the category. It's doing very poorly in at-shelf win rate. It's doing 22%. It's only able to get 22% of the at-shelf decisions. It's doing very well in pre-shelf. It's very stable. Its brand stability quotient is 67% in relation to, and the category stability is 55. So it's over-indexing in brand stability. So it's doing well in terms of brand predictability, but there's a lot more room to improve the at-shelf decision decision share. So in this particular case, brand B would be focusing a lot more of the effort in temporary price reduction and other tactics for at-shelf win, for improving the at-shelf win rate. And again, they will be looking at particular segment. For example, in this particular case, they were not doing as well with women, so they would be focusing on women at shelf and trying to give them, or targeting the messaging or targeting the vehicle to target that particular shopper segment and win more of the share of the shelf. So the two cases, one case was clear indication from the metrics that you needed to focus on the pre-shelf. In the second case, you were focusing a lot more on winning at-shelf win rate. So giving another example, this is more to do with the kind of marketing tactics you would use. There are two examples of promotion A and promotion B, which both had the same incremental impact in terms of increasing a brand performance. So in brand A had and promotion A and promotion B had the same impact in terms of incremental sales, whether for a particular week. However, the difference was by looking at the buyer mix, one of them led to much higher incidence of pre-shelf decisions, whereas the promotion B was, even though you influenced the same final outcome, you actually you still had people considering at the shelf before making up the mind. So fundamentally, if you just look at the total sales, you would conclude that both promotion A and promotion B had the same net impact. But looking at your previous strategies, the promotion A had much better impact in increasing your pre-shelf, and depending on how you're able to keep those pre-shelf decisions over time, you can actually increase your investment in promotion A if your goal is to increase pre-shelf decision making or increase your brand stability versus increasing the at-shelf win rate. In fact, you can take all the promotion tactics you have and rank order them in terms of where they fall, whether they are primarily for your brand or for your category, they are more influential in increasing pre-shelf decision or more influential in increasing at-shelf win rate. So that helps you in deciding where to invest. The last example, a case study that I'll give, is basically using the decision mix tracking over time to determine the residual value of a promotion. For example, in this case, the performance of a particular brand peaked in about March and April and started falling. And by looking at sales data, you just saw the sales fall. But the promotion actually, there was a promotion running that ended in April, and the net effect of that was not only decrease in the total sales performance, but actually increase in the percentage of people who made at-shelf decision. At the same time, in about May, there was some news coverage about GMOs, and that led to more and more people actually starting to look at different products at the shelf. So it increased the overall category mix of at-shelf decision and also for the particular brand. So by having visibility, by overlaying the information about promotion schedule, by overlaying the information about external factors, for example, important news about issues that encourage people, more and more people to look at packaging, you're able to now see the actual impact on the decision mix and respond appropriately. So if there's a big news about GMOs and your competition is responding better with packaging on GMO, clearly you might be at risk of losing more and more of the undecided, the orange people to your competition. So this gives you a tool to basically respond appropriately to both external factors as well as your own promotions. So hopefully that these 4 examples in the time that I had gives you an idea of how you can apply the metrics of brand stability and at-shelf win rate, and more importantly, the at-shelf, the buyer mix to determine, decision mix to determine how to place your marketing dollars. So there are many different ways in which you can use it, but overall, the first thing is to really understand where is your brand in relation to the category in terms of decision mix, because that's the big starting point. Having a general idea about the category is not enough, because you need to understand how your brand stands in terms of the share of at-shelf and pre-shelf decisions. The second thing would be using, just like the 4 quadrants, the quad example that we had, using that to develop a marketing plan based upon who you are. You could have a marketing plan based upon brand marketing. You can have a marketing plan if you are a shopper marketing, in charge of shopper marketing. You could have a different plan if you have a category manager, because once you know the buyer mix, you can have a slightly different plan based upon your brand goal. And then the mixed model also allows you to actually develop tactics for implementing. And I gave several examples of where to focus on once you know all the tactics or marketing vehicles that are available for each of the population, particularly because you have visibility now not only to the 4 different buckets, but also by different segments. And finally, since you have access not only to brand performance, but you have access to brand performance by the different decision mix, you want to track that over time, because it's a constantly changing number, which will depend on not only your activities, but your competition's activities, as well as external factors that we already understand greatly influences how shoppers are making purchase decisions. So real motivation is not enough to understand the purchase decision mix one time, but you need to do that continuously, because the shopper preferences are constantly changing. The dynamic of the category is changing constantly with more and more products being introduced. And it's not enough to take a rear view approach and only understand the dynamic of the decision process once. It's something that you have to keep track on continuously, and really have to keep the shopper first in all your decisions. And that's the analytical framework that's enabled by measurement technology that is able to dissect your decision process and classify them into pre-shelf decision and post or at-shelf decision, and then help you in tracking that over time and provide you tools to actually then apply different techniques to bring more of the decisions in your favor. So with that, I would first like to go back to the question that the user had. Maybe I can go back to the slide.
Well, Rajeev, I've already answered her and told her we'll be sending her the slide and the complete presentation, and she said that'll be fine.
Okay.
So we've taken care of that woman. We do have one more quick question, though, if you have a moment. How do you and your clients select retailers where video mining studies are conducted?
The question is how they are conducted?
How do you and your clients select retailers where video mining studies are conducted? I presume clients, she means CPGs.
Well, it's not. So we would study. We would have quote unquote studies where we address specific problems. But what we are tracking about here is continuous tracking. So we have panel of stores from leading retailers that creates a representation of types of retailers, types of retail stores, and types of shoppers that we are tracking continuously. So you can actually look at insights on a continuous basis, as well as answer questions on a custom basis. So there are many different aspects of choosing those stores and the particular retailers.
Okay, one quick last question. Is the brand tracking service available today?
Yes, we have just in fact announced we have been doing different pilots to understand the decision process, and we just introducing the service. Actually, we announced it yesterday. So the short answer is yes, the brand service tracking is available to understand both your brand and category tracking decision process.
Okay, excellent. To learn more about the information presented in this webinar, please email Rajeev at rsharma@videomining.com.